So to kick off this deep dive, I want you to just imagine a strawberry plant for a second.
Okay, a strawberry plant.
Yeah. And it's sending out this little runner across the soil to produce a completely new plant right next to it.
Right.
And that new strawberry plant, it's going to be a near-perfect genetic match to its parent, like practically a clone.
Yeah, basically an exact copy.
But then, and here's the contrast for today's mission picture.
Mm-hmm.
Two foxes out in the wild, and they have a litter of pups.
Oh, sure.
The pups, they clearly resemble the parents, but every single pup has its own completely unique combination of traits.
Right, like maybe one has slightly darker fur or another has bigger ears.
Exactly, different tail shape, whatever.
Yeah.
So the big question we're unpacking today is why? Why does one natural process create near-exact copies while the other creates this massive range of variation?
It's such a good question. And, well, the answer really comes down to biological strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to recognize that parents aren't passing down actual physical traits to their offspring.
Right, they're not literally handing them a trait.
No, not at all. They're passing down discrete packets of code. So to really understand the foxes and the strawberries, we have to look at the fundamentally different ways life hands its instructions over to the next generation.
And when we say inheritance, I think a lot of people picture, well, it's not like handing down a blue eye or brown hair,
Right.
It's honestly more like passing down a recipe card. Like you aren't handing the next generation a fully baked cake. You're just handing them the precise instructions on how to bake it themselves.
I love that analogy. And, those instructions are encoded in the DNA, the physical traits you actually see, the phenotype, as we call it.
Yeah.
Those are just the final products of those recipes being followed by the cells.
Got it.
But what's really crucial here, especially for organisms like those foxes or humans, is that they carry two copies of most of their chromosomes.
Okay, two copies.
Right. You get one set of chromosomes from one parent and one set from the other. So you essentially have two copies of many of your genes. And that built-in redundancy, that is the absolute foundation of genetic variation.
Because having two copies means they aren't always going to be identical, right?
Exactly. You have different gene versions, and scientists call these alleles.
Okay, alleles.
Yeah, so you might have a gene that governs, say, fur color. But the specific gene version, the allele, provides a uniquely coded instruction to make a specific protein. And the way those proteins interact that is what ultimately builds all the variation we see on the outside.
So if the genetic material is essentially this massive collection of recipe cards, and you have these different versions of the recipes, then the method an organism uses to pass them down pretty much dictates everything about its future.
It dictates the entire evolutionary trajectory, yeah.
So let's look at the most direct way to hand that code over first, like the biological copy machine, asexual reproduction.
Right. So the defining mechanism of asexual reproduction is that it involves only a single genetic source, just one parent.
Just what?
Yep. The genetic information gets duplicated, and the offspring receives the exact same genetic sequence as that one parent. So, barring any weird copying errors, this makes the offspring genetically identical clones.
Which is wild to think about. And the natural world has some pretty fascinating ways of pulling this off. I mean, we mentioned the strawberry plant sending out a runner.
Sure.
But it happens across entirely different branches of the tree of life, too. You've got, like, budding yeast. You have bacterial cell division, where a single cell literally just replicates its DNA and splits into two.
Oh, totally. There are even sea anemones that can reproduce by just splitting themselves right down the middle.
Wow.
Yeah, or they'll drop a little piece of tissue that just grows into a whole new genetically identical anemone. And it's not just plants or microbes doing this.
So what's the point of doing it that way?
Efficiency, sheer efficiency. Asexual reproduction allows an organism to completely bypass the huge energy cost of having to find a mate, court that mate, and successfully reproduce.
Oh, that makes sense. Dating is exhausting even for animals.
Right. I mean, if a sea anemone is thriving in its current spot on a coral reef, the absolute most biologically economical thing it can do is rapidly duplicate itself. It's just taking a successful genetic formula and scaling it up.
But wait, if they are the exact clones, doesn't that mean the population is just completely genetically static?
Yeah.
Like, forever?
Well, not entirely. Because mutations still happen.
Okay, mutation.
Yeah, they are random, permanent changes in the DNA sequence. They just occur naturally when cells replicate.
Kind of like a typo in the recipe card.
Exactly like a typo. Most of these typos are neutral, some are harmful, and occasionally one might actually be beneficial. But overall, yeah, an asexually reproducing population is very uniform, and that uniformity is incredibly effective if the environment is highly stable.
Because if the recipe already works perfectly for the temperature, the predators, the whole environment, there's no reason to change it.
Bingo. There's no biological incentive.
But, environments are almost never permanently stable, like the temperature shifts, or a novel virus rolls in, or some new predator migrates into the territory.
And when that happens, a population of clones is essentially a sitting duck.
Right, because if a disease targets that specific genetic recipe, the entire population can crash all at once, because they literally all share the exact same biological vulnerability.
Which is exactly the evolutionary pressure that brings us to sexual reproduction. To survive an unpredictable, changing environment, a species has to abandon that hyper-efficiency of cloning and start, well, shuffling the genetic deck.
So instead of one parent making an exact copy, you have two genetic sources contributing to the offspring.
And the mechanism here is so elegant. Each parent randomly contributes just one copy of their two gene versions for any given trait.
Just one.
Right. So the offspring still ends up with two copies total, one from the male parent and one from the female parent. But because the specific copies passed on are selected at random, you get completely new, unique combinations forged in the offspring.
It's definitely worth pausing here, because there is this super persistent myth about how this shuffling actually works.
Oh, the paint mixing thing.
Yes. A lot of people, even subconsciously, think of inheritance like mixing paint. Like the assumption is that if an offspring gets exactly 50% of its genetic material from one parent and 50% from the other,
then the child should look like a perfectly blended average of the two.
Exactly, like mixing a bucket of red paint with a bucket of white paint to get, a uniform pink.
It is an incredibly pervasive misconception, and it's mostly because we often see offspring that do look like a visual compromise between their parents.
Right.
But the biological reality is that inheritance is particulate. It is not a liquid blend. The genetic instructions, those alleles, they maintain their distinct individual identities when they are passed down.
They don't just dissolve into some new blended average.
No, they just pair up in discrete combinations.
There's actually a fantastic conceptual model for this that we came across. And you can do it with something as simple as dry pasta.
Oh, the pasta model is great.
Yeah. So for the listener, imagine you have two paper cups in front of you. One is the mother cup, and it contains two pieces of pasta representing her two gene versions for a specific trait. Let's say a piece of farfalle and a piece of rotini.
Okay.
Then the other cup is the father cup, and that one holds a penne and a ditalini. When reproduction occurs, you just close your eyes, draw one piece of pasta from the mother's cup and one piece from the father's cup.
And the result of that drawing perfectly illustrates what we mean by particulate inheritance. Because when you open your eyes, you don't end up holding some mushy, half farfalle, half pen hybrid noodle.
Right. You hold two distinct whole pieces of pasta. You've created a unique, discrete combination.
And if you repeat the process for a second offspring, you might randomly draw the rotini and the ditalini instead.
And that continuous random drawing of discrete units mathematically explains why siblings can look so completely different from each other, even though they share the same parents?
Exactly. They are drawing from the exact same two parental cups, but they are receiving different random combinations of those individual alleles.
It really makes it clear.
It also explains how an offspring can exhibit a physical trait that neither parent visibly showed. Because if both parents carry a hidden recessive version of a gene like a specific allele tucked away in their cup that isn't being expressed in their own bodies.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. They can both happen to pass that exact recessive allele down to the child at the same time. The child receives the two recessive copies, and suddenly a completely new phenotype appears in the family line.
Because the selection of which allele gets passed down is random. So the entire system is just governed by probability.
Pure probability.
Which brings us right back to middle school biology and those classic 2x2 grids we all learned to draw. Punnett squares.
Ah, yes. The Punnett square. It's a brilliant tool for visualizing possible combinations, but it so often leads to a fundamental misunderstanding of probability.
Yeah, we call it the Punnett square trap. The assumption is that the grid represents a guaranteed destiny for a family. Like, if a Punnett square calculates a 25% chance of a specific trait appearing, and a family has 4 children, people just assume the math dictates that exactly one of those 4 children will absolutely have the trait.
Right. It's basically the gambler's fallacy applied to genetics. A Punnett square only displays the possible outcomes and their statistical probabilities for a single event. It does not guarantee a specific distribution across a whole family.
It's really no different than flipping a coin, is it?
Not at all. Every single fertilization event is a completely independent event. If you flip a coin and it lands on heads 3 times in a row, the universe does not owe you a tails on the 4th flip just to balance the ledger.
The odds are still exactly 50-50.
Exactly. So in genetics, if there is a 25% probability of an offspring inheriting a specific recessive trait, a family could have 4 children who all express the trait. Or they could have 10 children where none of them express it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Punnett square predicts large-scale statistical trends across massive populations, not the specific outcome of one family's kids.
That statistical reality is so crucial. And, it ties directly into another term that gets heavily misused in this space, the word dominant.
Oh boy, yes it does.
Because in everyday language, calling something dominant implies that it is stronger or vastly superior or just the most common thing in the environment.
But in a genetic context, dominance has absolutely nothing to do with frequency or superiority. It solely describes the relationship between 2 different alleles in a single individual.
So what does it actually mean then?
It just means that if an organism inherits one dominant allele and one recessive allele, the cellular machinery follows the instructions of the dominant allele to build the protein. That is the entirety of what dominance means. It just dictates expression.
It's completely counterintuitive to how we use the word socially.
Totally.
Like a perfect example from the sources is polydactyly. That's the genetic trait of having extra fingers or toes. Polydactyly is actually caused by a dominant allele.
Yet having extra digits is incredibly rare in the human population. The dominant nature of the allele dictates that if you inherit it, the trait will absolutely be expressed.
But whether that trait is common in the global population depends on entirely different factors, right?
Right. It depends on evolutionary history, natural selection, and how frequently that specific allele actually exists in the gene pool to begin with. Dominance does not magically make an allele spread through a population. It just determines what happens when it's present.
Okay, so now we need to bridge the gap between these microscopic mechanisms, the shuffling of alleles, the probabilities, the dominant and recessive stuff, and the macroscopic world. Like, how does this massive engine of genetic variation actually play out in extreme environments to ensure a species survives?
Well, to see the true utility of genetic variation, you really have to look at environments that push biology to its absolute limits. And Alaska serves as an incredible natural laboratory for this, both in human-directed breeding and in wild populations.
Okay, let's talk about the Alaskan sled dog, because this is fascinating. When I think of controlled breeding, I usually picture like purebred dogs at a kennel club show.
Sure, like Westminster.
Yeah. And in those environments, breeding is driven by a strict visual standard. A Dalmatian has to have a specific pattern of spots. A golden retriever needs a specific coat texture. The whole goal is visual uniformity.
But the breeding philosophy behind elite Alaskan sled dogs completely inverts that entire model.
How so?
Well, if you look at a champion team running the Iditarod, the dogs often look nothing alike. You might have one dog in the harness with a thick, double-layered black coat and pricked ears, looking very much like a traditional Siberian husky.
Okay.
But running right next to it could be a dog with short, sleek brown fur, a leaner build, and floppy ears. It might bear a strong resemblance to a European pointer or a greyhound.
So visually, they are entirely different animals.
Entirely. But genetically, they share a highly specific functional signature. They are part of what we call a genetic mosaic.
Because the mushers are not breeding for a cosmetic phenotype.
Exactly. They are breeding strictly for physiological performance. They need a complex combination of extreme endurance, sprinting speed, an intense psychological drive to pull, and this is important, varying degrees of heat tolerance because racing temperatures can fluctuate wildly.
Wow, so form entirely follows function. A musher really doesn't care if a dog's ears are pointy or floppy, as long as its cardiovascular system can process oxygen at an elite level.
Right. And to achieve that, mushers actively outcross their lines. They intentionally bring in genetics from Seleucus or pointers or mastiffs to introduce specific functional alleles into the sled dog gene pool.
And by avoiding the strict inbreeding required to produce a uniform cosmetic look, they preserve this massive reservoir of genetic variation.
Yes. This highly diverse gene pool keeps the overall population incredibly resilient. It makes them adaptable to different racing conditions and free from the genetic bottlenecks that so often plague cosmetically purebred lines.
It's just brilliant. And that human-managed example perfectly mirrors how wild populations utilize variation to survive, too. Like the wild Pacific salmon runs in Alaska. They operate on the exact same biological principle.
Oh, absolutely. Salmon are perhaps the ultimate case study in why sexual reproduction and genetic diversity act as a biological buffer. So the classic life cycle of the Pacific salmon involves hatching in a freshwater stream, migrating out to the open ocean to mature, and then navigating thousands of miles back to the precise stream where they were born to spawn.
Which is a miracle in itself.
It really is. But the system isn't perfectly rigid. A small, crucial percentage of these salmon exhibit a behavior known as straying.
Straying.
Yeah.
Meaning they don't go back to their home stream.
Right. Instead of returning to their natal stream, they spawn in an entirely different neighboring river system.
Oh, wow.
And that straying behavior is a mechanism for genetic distribution. It constantly introduces new gene versions into isolated populations. And on top of that, the spawning process itself maximizes variation.
How does it do that?
Well, a single female salmon will often dig multiple nests, they're called redds, along the riverbed. She's depositing her eggs across a wide area, and those different nests can be fertilized by completely different males.
So the result is that within a single stretch of river, in a single generation, you have this immense variety of genetic combinations.
Right. You don't have a uniform block of clones. You have a highly diversified portfolio of biological traits.
And that diversified portfolio is exactly what prevents a total population collapse when the environment abruptly changes.
Exactly. Think about the river systems in Alaska facing rapidly warming waters due to climate change. If an entire river was populated by asexually reproduced salmon, millions of identical clones, and their shared genetic recipe was highly sensitive to thermal stress.
A single severe heat wave could literally eradicate the entire run in one season.
Yes, because they would all possess the exact same vulnerability.
But because they reproduce sexually, the resulting genetic variation provides a safety net.
Precisely. Out of millions of unique combinations, some individual salmon will randomly possess a suite of alleles that grant them a slightly higher physiological tolerance to warmer water.
So they might carry the specific genetic instructions to produce, like, higher levels of heat shock proteins, which protect their cells from thermal damage.
Right. Now, the population as a whole will still suffer during a heat wave. Many will not survive. But the crucial point is that the variant individuals, the ones with the heat-tolerant combinations, will survive. They will spawn. And they will pass those specific advantageous alleles to the next generation.
So the variation generated by sexual reproduction provides the raw biological material that natural selection actually acts upon.
Exactly. It allows the population to adapt in real time as the world shifts around them.
It fundamentally changes how you view the landscape, doesn't it? Like every organism is carrying this massive, shuffling library of code.
It really is.
Bringing this all back to the imagery we started with. The strawberry plant extending a runner across the soil, and those fox pups tumbling outside their den. Asexual reproduction is life's strategy for preserving a highly successful genetic pattern by copying it directly.
It requires minimal energy, it operates at incredible speed, and it absolutely dominates when an environment remains stable and forgiving.
But sexual reproduction is the counter strategy. It preserves the broader family resemblance while relentlessly shuffling the underlying code to forge new combinations.
Right. It is metabolically expensive, but it generates the critical genetic diversity that buffers a species against emerging diseases, shifting climates, and the constant pressure of predators.
So, neither biological method is universally superior. They're simply different evolutionary tools solving the exact same fundamental problem. How to propel life into the future under entirely different sets of conditions.
Beautifully said. Recognizing the mechanics of that process, how discrete alleles are passed down, the probabilistic nature of inheritance, and the constant generation of variation, it allows us to see the natural world not as a collection of static finished products, but as an endlessly iterating system of survival.
It makes the complexity of life that much more remarkable. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you, the listener, with a question to turn over in your own mind.
Right.
Based on everything we've explored today about the risks of stability and the necessity of adaptation, what might a population gain from producing offspring that are not all genetically identical?